looks like we can get going. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate your taking the time to be here with us today for the Turning 22 During COVID-19 webinar, which will be featuring NESCA's transition specialist, Tabitha Monahan. Just as a matter of some housekeeping, just want to check in and make sure that we only use the chat feature for any kind of technical difficulties you may be running into. And then also we'll have the Q&A running as well. And Tabitha is more than welcome to answer questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to post those there and I will get those questions to her. And we're also going to try to run some polls throughout the webinar, so stay tuned for those as well. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Tabitha.
Hi everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today while we talk about this time-sensitive and nerve-wracking topic. So today we'll be going over a few key pieces. We're going to be discussing the transition process as it normally goes pre-COVID, the additional challenges we're experiencing because of the pandemic, and actions we can take. We will be doing a Q&A at the end, but as James said, if you have any questions that pop up in the moment, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get those answered for you. So the transition process legally begins for the IEP that is active when your child turns 14. And the transition process typically includes years of planning. It's a lot of rush, wait, rush again, and then, oh my goodness, it's finally here. So before we get started, I just wanted to see, who we had with us today. Are most of you parents, students, educators, other professionals? And also where parents are in the transition process, and if there's any adult services that you are already connected with. So we'll take a few moments to go ahead and please fill out the polls.
All right, so it's looking like this is mostly a greater Boston or outside of Boston and Massachusetts crowd. And most of the folks have a child turning 22 this year. There are some who have been working on transition for a couple of years, and then others who are still early in the process but are nearing that 22 point. And then as far as the adult services agencies, it looks like DDS is the big winner there, and MRC as well.
All right, well, thank you so much for answering those. I think it's really helpful to see what other parents are experiencing and where everybody is in the process. So when we think about transition, we think about this graph, I think, greatly demonstrates all of the intricacies of transition. So the four main concepts is it's vision driven by the student. We are looking for a results-oriented process, that it's coordinated with all the moving parts. And it's not only just academic, it's also functional in helping the student be more successful once they're done with their education. And so that includes the post-secondary education and training, employment, independent living, and being involved in the community of their choice. And we do this by incorporating the students' strengths, preferences, interests, needs, and we expect student participation, that there will be strong and tough post-secondary goals, transition goals, and that the transition planning form will be a guide throughout the full process. So as we discussed, the transition process begins at the IEP meeting where the child turns 14. So typically the student is 13 when the transition process specifically begins. And at this time, the child is invited to all of their transition meetings. And we start to see that the transition planning form is incorporated into the meeting. We should also be seeing that age-appropriate transition assessments are occurring. And at each meeting, we should be talking about graduation dates, end of services. Now, that's something that's going to happen continually throughout the process. At age 18 through the end of the education and entitlement at 22, we have some additional processes that need to be incorporated. So around the age of 17, the notice of transfer of parental rights occurs because when the child turns 18, unless there's a guardianship or the child delegates decision-making, the child has the right to make their own decisions regarding education. And the Chapter 688 referral is sent out at least 2 years prior to the end of the special education entitlement. So this typically happens between the ages of 16 and 20, depending again on the IEP team and the planned graduation dates. And so when you're thinking about the graduation date, you should be thinking about not only the student meeting the requirements for graduation of the district, but also the transition skills that your student will need, and that the student is making and has made the necessary progress in their transition goals. If you feel that this isn't happening, definitely talk early and often about the options for a gap year or fifth year placement or another transition program. Many students benefit greatly from additional supports through repeated opportunities for important skills related to social skills, pre-vocational and employment skills and awareness, executive functioning supports, and adult living skills, including financial planning and literacy and domestic skills. It's also important to remember that graduation is a change in placement and must be determined at least 1 year in advance. This date should be on your child's IEP. You will most likely find that in the additional information section of the IEP towards the back. The main difference when the transition planning process starts in the IEP meeting includes the transition planning form. Now there's 3 key sections to the transition planning form. There's the post-secondary vision, the disability-related needs, and the action plan. And we'll see here that the post-secondary vision is the student's vision. It should be this, what the student expects for their future, both regarding post-secondary education and training, but also adult living and community supports. When the student's vision may not match the rest of the team's vision, it does make sense to separate and have the parent or team vision separate. But the guiding force of the transition planning form should be the student's vision. The second section is disability-related needs. And so this is what supports will your student need to reach their post-secondary vision as it relates to their disability? Will they need small group repeated opportunities? Will they need community-based experiences? What type of programming and related services will be required to assist the individual in reaching their post-secondary vision. And one of the most important areas of the TPF is the action plan. So in the action plan, you are taking the student's post-secondary vision with their disability-related needs and going ahead and creating the items that need to occur and the items that have occurred. So this will be, has the child passed the MCAS test? Is the child going to receive tutoring so that they can do so later? What community-based education have they already experienced? What education, how are they going to meet the vision and goal transition goals related to the individual's disability-related needs? And this is not, again, not just an educational aspect. It needs to include employment opportunities, vocational support, as well as community experiences, and an action plan for a post-adult living that includes the individual having planning in their community and being active to their best of their abilities and choice in their own communities. So when it comes to transition, the main thing we really think of is getting involved with adult state agencies. And there are a slew of state agencies, and it turns into an alphabet soup. The main ones we're talking about when we talk about adult services are on this slide. As we found out from the poll, the majority of our participants today are with DDS, and the Department of Developmental Services is the expected adult agency. And as it sounds, they work with adults who have developmental disabilities, as well as individuals who have autism. The Department of Mental Health assists adults who have severe and persistent mental illness. Mass Rehab Commission works with individuals of all disabilities for their vocational support, but they also provide supported living services for those with primarily physical disabilities so that they can participate safely in their own communities. We also have the Mass Commission of the Blind and the Mass Commission of Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And these agencies are great supports for individuals with these medical conditions to help them be as successful and independent in society. So we heard me talking about the 688 referral. What exactly is that? Chapter 688 is the Massachusetts law which establishes that there should be a 2-year transition planning process for students who are going to require adult services. A 688 referral is just what it sounds like. It is a referral that is sent by the school district to the state agency the school deems most appropriate. So with an individual with developmental disability or autism, they would send it to DDS. An individual with severe and persistent mental illness would go to DMH. If there is not a clear-cut agency involved that would be involved with this student in adulthood, there is also the State Bureau of Transition Planning where the school can send the referral, and the Bureau will work to find the appropriate agency and combinations of supports for the student's transition. It's important to note that the 688 is just a referral. You and your child need to complete all the paperwork sent by the adult agency and apply for services. This is true even if you've had child services from the state agency. It's also important to ensure that you let the school know when your child has been approved for adult services to ensure that the agency is informed and knows about future team meetings. This is also a case where the earlier the better. If the school is sending out the 688 referral when the student is 18 and it's still expected they will remain in school until 22, still fill out that paperwork right then. Getting onto DDS or DMH's radar earlier rather than later is of huge benefit for you and your child and the transition process. So when we're talking about adult services, it's important to realize that there is a huge difference between the entitlement that you're used to your child getting and how the adult service world works. With an IEP, if the team determines that the child has a specific need to make effective progress, the child is going to get those supports. In the adult service world, it's more complicated. Not only does a need have to be identified, but there also has to be someone, a company, able to provide those supports, and there has to be money to provide those supports. So your children will be prioritized for the supports available to them. I'm going to talk mostly about DDS today because most of our participants will have children going to adult services with DDS. So you will also have a lot of decisions to make once your child is approved for DDS. And one of those is choosing the model that you want to use. So there's the traditional model, which is what we think of when we think of day programs and community-based day supports. There's also two self-directed models that are available right now, and that's agency with choice or the person-directed program. Next, agencies will ask you to tour several programs, and once you and your child have decided the best program for you, the agency will send the referral to the selected programs. And so then the program will accept or decline the referral based on their ability to provide the appropriate supports for your student and the space in the program. Each program will have its own intake process and its own intake timeline. After that process has taken place, there will be coordination between the school, the adult service agency, and the program to coordinate the transition from the school system to the adult placement. Your child may have several visits to the new program. The program may do an observation at the school. In the case of a self-directed program, the family will be connected with support brokers who are individuals that work for DDS. These are different than the support brokers or the fiscal intermediary skills trainers that you would experience if you use the state plan PCA program. So before we go into some of the challenges during COVID for the transition process, I wanted to just ensure that any questions that we could answer. All right, if you're still writing your question, please continue to do so, but I am going to continue to discuss some of the challenges that I have noticed during the pandemic. The first, and I think most obvious that we're all feeling and seeing, is the meeting of transition goals. Schools and programs such as TAPS or MRC through the, TAPS is through the Independent Living Centers, or a PREETS program, which is an employment program for transition age youth through MRC, may have had difficulty providing the necessary community and in-person services for students to meet their goals. We also found that as schools were trying to figure out remote learning, there were definitely quite a few hiccups as they were trying to provide the appropriate supports for our students. Adult programs and tours and referrals also had significant challenges during COVID, as those day programs also closed down. And many of those day programs still today are providing remote services to the individuals they currently serve, but they're not open for prospective families to tour. There are also months and months of backlog. The individuals who graduated in March and were expecting to go to day programs or day services have not been able to have their referrals processed. So when these programs start to be able to accept referrals again, they're going to have to go back to the referrals for the students that graduated in March. And so even if your student is graduating in November, December, there may still be a delay while the different programs are continuing to work through the backlog of referrals. Another thing is that remote just takes longer. And that it includes communication, access to services, as we were discussing, and planning. Especially with a lot of the schools and the adult service agencies, they did not have access to their voicemail, so they had to call in several times a day to get their messages, which extended the time it would take to get back to you. Access to the supports like the related service providers, OT, PT. It took a while to figure out how to do that. And I know speech pathologists specifically had a significant difficulty in working with their licensing board on how to provide services remotely. And of course, that made planning take longer. We had a lot of individuals who were up for 3-year evaluations or needed transition assessments, and they weren't able to get them done in the time frame that is expected because of the sudden closure. It also was very challenging to have team meetings, and that frequently required trying to figure out how to do it remotely and delayed everything. It is important to note, as students are going back now, that if the student has community-based services as part of the IEP, they can still receive those services even during the pandemic. Field trips may be shut down, but this is part of their students' transition goals and their success in learning through community-based repetitive opportunities. Now, there are a significant number of challenges related to that, such as transportation, worksite and volunteer opportunities, and availability of those opportunities. But these are additional challenges that you and the rest of the IEP team should be having conversations about to help ensure that your student is getting the community-based and the learning support they need.
And Tabitha, this is Jane. I will interject here. We've gotten a question on one of the items that you presented.
Absolutely.
Schools seem to write generic or vague transition plans and often will say what the student or parent should do and not what the school will do. And the goals are often not skill-based. What is the best way to address this? And do you find this in your work?
So I have definitely seen this in my work, and it really is very program specific. I believe the action plan should include things that are done in the community and at home, but should also include what is being done at school. The transition planning form is not part of the IEP, and so there is a lot more freedom to really do the wraparound approach. I would ask the team for more objective-based, measurable opportunities for growth, and keep working with your IEP team to really narrow down the goals. A goal may have a vague theme to really incorporate all the challenges and the intricacies of independent living, but that's where the objectives and benchmarks can really be beneficial, to have that measurable intent to increased skills.
Great. And we have one of our participants has raised her hand. I'm going to allow her to talk now if that's.
Absolutely.
There we go. And Sue, if you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Yep.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You are.
Oh, great, thank you. Well, I had a question about, you talked about community-based experiences during the transition process. When I have a son who just turned 22, so his transition plan kind of just got stopped completely when school shut down, and he had been participating in a job placement, but that all came to an end. So, and we haven't been able to get back into that placement, which he really enjoys. My question is, if things start opening up and with schools opening back up, would we be able to go back into and ask for those job experiences to take place and finish what we started, which was supposed to go for a few more months as part of the transition process?
And this job placement was through the school?
Yeah, yes, they had planned it and organized it, yes.
I do bring up COVID-specific compensatory services a little bit later in the presentation, but to answer your question now is I would absolutely request an IEP team meeting to discuss the options. It's the responsibility of the IEP team to determine what supports and services are necessary, but there is state guidance that those meetings should occur, including and especially for the individuals who have turned 22 and aged out of the education program during the pandemic.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And so I think that actually brings up the next point perfectly, is one of the things that I think have been hardest for the students, and that includes the students who are graduating high school, graduating college, aging out of the education system, that they didn't get the closure they were expecting and needed. No one's year this year has gone the way they intended, and having their final year without the typical transition, either to college or to an adult placement, allows for closure. A lot of students left school March 13th and did not get to see their friends again if they were graduating or aging out. And so that is a huge challenge that I think both the students, the teachers, and the parents have found incredibly challenging during the pandemic. So the reason we're all here is figuring out what we can do about the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic and our kids are going to continue to grow and age whether we like it or not. And so I'm going to talk about a few things that we can do ourselves and what we can do collaboratively with the IEP team to really help continue your student making effective progress. The first is that the assessing should still be happening. Schools should still be conducting their 3-year evaluations. It understandably took a while for schools to figure out how to do so remotely, and they may be a little behind, but it has been made clear both in the federal and state government that these evaluations should be happening, and they should be happening in the same timelines regardless of the pandemic. And as a silver lining to this, if there can be a silver lining to the pandemic, is the home observations that you have are going to hold more weight. A lot of the assessing process we may do now will be in the home-based setting through home videos and remote experiences. And so this is a great opportunity for you to really tell the story of how things are generalizing at home when having the conversation with the IEP team. And also, making sure to collect the collateral provider reports. What is the OT seeing? What is the speech or ABA person seeing? Has there been a change in behavior? And keeping the open dialogue of information related to the transition skills you have observed during the spring and summer during the remote learning. And as schools open back up again, definitely makes sense, especially if your child has experienced a regression of skills, to ask for a transition assessment to obtain that new baseline data. And so that way we can start from a place where your student is, help them get back to where they were prior to the pandemic, and then keep them making the effective progress they need to be successful after graduation. And during this time, the informal assessments are going to be so much more beneficial than likely a lot of the formal and normalized assessment processes. We really get to see the difference between what a child is able to do at school, what they are demonstrating to the teachers, and then what they're demonstrating to you. I know we've all had those conversations where, the teacher's telling a story about your child and you're like, are you sure that's my son? And that's just, it's a different environment. And a lot of times those skills are at different levels depending on what the environment is. And so we can take this opportunity to ensure that those different environmental inputs are making its way into the action plan on the TPF and informing the IEP goals and objectives. So what kind of planning can we do? I really think that being home with your children is a great time to really focus on person-centered planning. And so we have the overall vision that is in the TPF and the IEP, but that overall vision can be broken down into some much smaller subcategories, and you can get a much more detailed plan for what your child's vision in those areas. What do they actually want to do in their community? Are they interested in being in a pickup basketball league? Do they want to volunteer at their local library? Do they want to live in their own apartment? What town do they want that apartment to be in? What do they foresee needing for supports when they're living on their own and not in your home anymore? And there's so many free and paid supports available to assist with person-centered planning. There's a lot of really great, unique ways to look at the individual's vision and what supports are available, especially those natural supports that we may not necessarily think of, which will allow your child to meet their vision. And so definitely, when you have a chance, take a look at those person-centered resources that are available. I think you all will be very pleasantly surprised at the amount of free resources that are available, but there are also facilitators that can help with that process. I also strongly encourage individuals and parents to think about the financial resources that are available to your child and may be needed in the future. So if you haven't applied, if your child's 18 and you haven't applied for SSI, now's a great time to do it. SSI is still processing applications. And in fact, it's kind of easier because your interview will absolutely be on the phone. Now you don't have to go with your child to the Social Security office. And even if you are fully able to support your child now and you're thinking, oh, they don't need SSI, I would strongly encourage you to really think about that, because the SSI gives them their own financial security. And if there's a proven disability before the age of 22, your child would be eligible to collect under your Social Security disability benefits. And that opens up a lot of doors for them. I could do a whole nother webinar on the benefits of SSDI versus SSI, but definitely look into that. Does your child need a representative payee? And if so, what can you do to still help your child gain financial literacy skills? One thing that I really like doing with individuals that I'm rep payee for is helping them to understand where all their money's going. You know, it can be especially hard for somebody who has a rep payee to understand, you know, why they're only getting $20, $30 a week, or they only get $100 a month when their check is much bigger. And so by going through and explaining the cost and having a visual that makes sense for them of where their money is going, that helps them understand the big picture, and over time can increase their understanding of the limited budget they have. I also really like the idea of opening a savings account or having a prepaid reloadable credit card for them, so that they're able to have responsibility for a small amount of their spending, and also helping them create a savings goal for that spending so they understand the value of saving money and having a larger purchase. There are also special needs trusts and ABLE accounts, which is something a lot of parents think about for their children as they age. If you are interested in setting up a special needs trust for your child, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your financial advisor and a lawyer that specializes in these trusts. It has to be set up in a very specific way for the trust to not affect your child's benefits. And it's absolutely possible to do. And I have worked with individuals that have had these trusts, and it has really made a difference in the person's quality of life. A relatively new financial benefit that became available in the last 5 to 10 years is something called an ABLE account. It's for individuals who were disabled young in life. But the difference between an ABLE account and a special needs trust is the individual can deposit their money into that trust. So if they have a small part-time job, or they have a extra money from their SSI at the end of the month, they can deposit up to a certain limit of money into their own ABLE account. They're also able to receive gifts from family members up to a certain amount. And the benefit of this is it also does not count towards the SSI asset limit and the Medicaid Mass Health asset limit. And that can be so essential and really hurts individuals for having any sorts of savings, because it can be a whole mess of things if they go above the $2,000 asset limit. And so that, you know, is really a great thing to consider. Fidelity is the one that manages the ABLE accounts in Massachusetts. However, it was recently changed that a person can enroll in an ABLE account program for any state. So that's another great thing to talk to your financial advisor about, to see the best ABLE account program for your child. I would also strongly consider, you know, seeing if your child's eligible for SNAP benefits. It may not be a lot, especially when they're receiving support from family still, but it again helps them understand their budgeting and gives them a little more financial security and autonomy. And if your child has not yet applied for Mass Health Medicaid, definitely get that application in. That is a resource that is immeasurable on how beneficial it is for your student. Decision making is probably one of the most difficult things that families have to consider as their child gets closer to 18 and 22. A lot of times, you know, and understandably, parents are concerned and worried for their child's well-being and their ability to make safe and rational decisions. However, there are a lot of alternatives to guardianship, which can help the child get the support they need while also maintaining their legal and human rights. So there's things like power of attorney, and there's a way to set up a power of attorney. So I believe it's a durable power of attorney, so that it's still effective when your child is able to make decisions for themselves, but also if they become incapacitated. Everybody should have a healthcare proxy, disability or not, but this can help an individual who the doctor has found is not able to make healthcare decisions be able to do so. And that way you have the ability to help your child make those healthcare decisions when they're not able to do so themselves. There's also another huge movement that's becoming increasingly popular in Massachusetts, and that's shared decision making. And this is a great alternative to guardianship, where the individual with the disability will identify people who will help them in making their own decisions. So I kind of think of this similarly to, you know, anybody who's getting signing a lease for the first time. They're going to ask their parents, what's this mean? Should I sign this? Same with a car loan. And so on a bigger scale, the individual can get the support they need for decision making, and having pre-identified people who will help them make decisions in different areas, such as medical care and where to live. And of course, there is always guardianship and conservatorship, which is a legal process, and is a great benefit for the individuals who need it. And so if that is a concern you have, definitely reach out to your medical doctor or neuropsychologist to see, to get guidance on that. I also, this is something I like to talk about with all of my parents that I work with, and it's an uncomfortable topic, but having future and emergency plans in place. I strongly recommend that everybody get those plans in place best they can while you're young and healthy and still able to provide the support to your child that you're used to. This will help make your life immensely easier when things get more challenging as you age, and we all never know when an emergency is going to hit. So having one or several plans in place will definitely help your child and you during that difficult time. I also think this is a fabulous time to talk about affordable housing. The wait list for affordable housing can be upwards of 10 years long. So if this is even an eventual goal 5 to 10 years from now, definitely start looking at the housing options. I would suggest applying for state and federal affordable housing. So federal affordable housing is often known as Section 8, and that is a movable voucher. There's also the town-based housing authorities. I would recommend applying at least in the town where you and your child live, but the state also has a movable voucher that is a great option to apply for, and there are many complexes that have affordable vouchers attached with them, both publicly and privately owned. But again, these lists are very long, so I would strongly recommend that if this is a long-term goal, working on this now. And even though I said earlier that it is challenging to look and plan programming during the pandemic, I still encourage you to look at the available programs. Their websites are available. See what they're doing for remote services. Ask your child's favorite teacher or provider for which ones students have recently transitioned to. And also ask the state agency what programs are their favorites. Ask them why and what they like about those programs. The state agencies are offering services remotely. And so you can also do a self-referral to MRC. Even if your 688 referral went to DDS, you can still, you and your child can still self-enroll in MRC to get those supports. There's a program called Transition to Adulthood program, which works through the Independent Living Center, and it really works well with transition programs and schools to have extra way to build upon those transition skills. DMH and DDS are offering remote services, especially through their day programs. And as I was talking about earlier, DDS has those two self-directed programs that may be a better option right now until traditional programming has returned to more normal operations. And you also can do a combination of traditional and self-directed services. So because most of us here will be going to DDS adult services, I'm going to talk a little bit more about those self-directed programs. The first one is agency with choice. A provider agency helps you develop and manage a program for your child. And so just like there's the IEP in the education world, there's something similar in the adult world. It's called the individual service plan. And the individual service plan will have the goals for your child. And so with agency with choice, the agency will help your child and you build a program around those goals. They do the administrative management of staff, but you still select the staff. And you decide what services that you want the staff to be working on. One of the downsides of this is if a person quits or is sick, coverage may or may not be available, unlike a traditional day program. There's also the person-directed program. With this program, the individual, with assistance from their family, works with a support broker who is a DDS state employee to develop a program based on those individual goals as stated in the service plan. The individual decides what services they want, and they're responsible for recruiting, hiring, training, and signing off on timesheets. Some funds may also be available to purchase goods and services like a gym membership if they can relate back to the individual's ISP goals. If your staff person quits, sick, or gets fired, the individual may not have coverage until a new employee is hired. All staff in this program are still required to pass a Cori check and fingerprint check prior to beginning work. But there is a web portal available that has all the documents that the family will need to complete the hiring process. This is a great option for an individual who really does need an individualized program to meet their post-secondary vision and individual support goals. However, as I'm sure it sounds like, this is a lot of work, and for most children, especially when they're starting out, they are going to need their family support and their family to do a huge chunk of this to make the program run smoothly. However, if any of you are using state plan PCA services, this may be a great option for you because you're already using a similar program, and you can combine those services as long as they don't overlap to really create a robust schedule for your child. So one thing that I think is very beneficial to still be working on at home is skill building. So a lot of the skill building that children were doing before in school can be done at home, and it may help your child individualize the skills more. So consult with your special education teacher, your related service providers like OT, PT, speech, and your vocational counselor to kind of help with strategies so that your child is able to work on their ADLs and IADLs at home. And this can be more than just the life skills like laundry, cooking, and cleaning. You know, is there a job that your child has identified interest in having? You know, talk with your vocational counselor at the school to see what the prerequisite skills are for that job and ask them how you can help your child build those skills at home. This is also a great time to help them build greater responsibility for their independent living skills. Take a moment and think about what you do to help your child get ready in the morning. Are they able to set the alarm clock for themselves? Will they brush their teeth and hair without reminders from you? Take a tiny small part of it and try to help them, again, get support from your school and IEP team for strategies to implement this, but give them, maybe help them set the alarm clock themselves for a bit. And then once they're comfortable with that, give them a reminder to go do it and back away on the reminders as they get more independent. And this may take a while, but every day is a new opportunity to learn these skills. And one of my favorite things to work on is pre-vocational skills. And again, the starting point's right there in the IEP and your child's vision for the future. And, some pre-vocational skills that will be useful for entry-level jobs are like bagging and putting away groceries. Can you and your child go to a self-checkout at the grocery store so they can practice that themselves? Practice giving and getting change. Have them figure out how much cash will be needed for your grocery shopping trip and check if the change that they receive back is correct. Take this opportunity to organize your home. Have them alphabetize books, mail, or magazines. And, again, this is always should be a team effort. So you can and should reach out to either your school's IEP team or a private transition specialist to help find meaningful activities so your child gets more buy-in. If they think we are all just giving them busy work, that's going to annoy them. They're not going to want to do that. So it's really important to try to get your child's buy-in. So there was a student I was working with this summer where the occupational therapist and vocational counselor had a combined goal, a transition goal together to work on building sorting activities. And these pre-created sorting activities bored this student and they did not like doing it, just wasn't into it. However, the student really enjoyed food and enjoyed grocery shopping. So with assistance from the students' parents, we got pictures of items in that student's home. And so then the student was able to practice filling grocery orders, bagging groceries, and doing an inventory and deciding what items need to be purchased next week. The student did and does still require significant support from others, but was more engaged in this work and was not only able to maintain interest and not regress in this skill, but was able to continue to make effective progress. So a lot of creativity and thinking outside of the box is necessary, but there are ways to support your child at home with these pre-employment and independent living skills. And before I move on to compensatory services, I just wanted to check in and see if there were any other questions.
Yes, so we had a question. Would you address dual enrollment? When can this begin and how best to investigate what the options are for dual enrollment?
So there are a lot of different programs with the different universities for dual enrollment. This is a conversation that should have at the IEP team meeting. And I think it makes sense while we're talking about progress meetings this fall. I would bring it up now and see what the team feels, because if the student's not ready for dual enrollment yet, going ahead and finding out what challenges are holding the student back from that, I think is super important, and that way we can address them now instead of later.
I think it's just important to clarify too, we use the term dual enrollment a lot to mean college participation for students who haven't yet finished high school, but dual enrollment is very specifically a program where you pay reduced tuition as a high school student, and there are specific criteria at some of the colleges that have dual enrollment applicants. And then, I mean, there are also colleges where a student could take a class at the age of 15. So just as Tabitha was saying, it's very broad, and there's not just a specific age. It has to do with the readiness and the appropriateness.
Great question. Thank you, Kelly, for adding your expertise with that. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, if you're thinking of more questions, please continue to send them in. I'm going to go ahead and continue on with compensatory services. I don't know about you all, but I was waiting on the edge of my seats for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to release their guidance on compensatory services. And they finally did at the end of August. And they discussed and made recommendations about compensatory services specifically related to COVID-19. So this will not work and be like compensatory services as we had previously thought about it. When it relates specifically to COVID-19, they're talking about services, school services or related services that were on the IEP that the student was not able to obtain those services due to the school closing. And it's to remedy a student's skill or knowledge loss or lack of effective progress that resulted from delayed, interrupted, suspended, or inaccessible IEP services because of the emergency suspension of the in-person education related to the pandemic. And so if this is a situation that you think your child either regressed or did not receive the support they needed due to the emergency closure, definitely request a team meeting to discuss the COVID-specific compensatory services. DESE has released guidance for those services, and this includes people who have aged out. So, you know, the students that graduated the end of March, April, you're still eligible to request this team meeting to discuss the loss of services. And DESE has released guidance that these meetings should occur no later than December 15th. They also provided samples of what COVID-specific compensatory services may be. And so some of the key ones are accessing agency and community resources and services. So that would be, you know, the transition planning and being able to connect with the day program or having a smooth transition to DDS. It includes the instruction that your children didn't get on their activities of daily living. It's really hard to show somebody how to safely shave through a Zoom. And includes specialized instruction related to MCAS. So if your student is still, and your child is still working on passing the MCAS and was supposed to receive specialized instruction for that, that is a specific compensatory service that was mentioned in this guidance. And of course, they also included things related to vocational and pre-employment services and instruction, travel training, and all of the related services. So again, if your team and your school hasn't reached out to you to schedule a team meeting, please reach out to your school to do this, and because they are required to at least have the conversation on what services would be appropriate for your child to get them back up to that baseline and to help mitigate the regression they experienced due to the pandemic. And the last thing that I think we really need to do, and turning 22 can be so stressful for parents, for students, for everybody, is celebrate. There are so many pieces that need to be in place, and it is such a stressful time full of change for you and your child. Really take the time to celebrate all that your child has achieved over the last 18 to 22 years and their goals for next. You know, this is supposed to be a time of happiness and joy, and yes, there's a lot changing and it can be nerve-wracking, but you know, don't forget to celebrate. You should be proud of yourself and your child. And would anybody like to share some of the ways they have been celebrating their child's and your own achievements during this time?
While we wait for that, there was a question here that we have. I think you touched on it a little bit, but if you could maybe expand on what MRC provides.
Yes. So for individuals who have another state agency, MRC provides vocational support. So it's similarly to transition programs. They will help a student find an appropriate career and help place them in a job. And if the need shows, occasionally there can be funding for a short-term job coach. But unless your child has a primarily physical disability, MRC provides vocational support. And I strongly recommend some of the resources here, and when we send out the PowerPoint, that these all are links to these resources. One of my favorites that I have found is a annotated IEP by the Federation for Children with Special Needs, and it really shows what should be in each section of the IEP, and I think that can be incredibly helpful when trying to make sure that, you know, we talked about very vague goals earlier and objectives, and this can really help increase understanding of what the IEP should look like. There's also some great guides regarding transition by the Federation, and also the ARC has a great transition timeline and turning 18 checklist. And I also have the link to all the different state websites. And I've provided some of my favorite skill building websites and programs. Some are free, some do require memberships, but these are great starting points for skill building at home. And if there's any more questions, thank you all so much. While we wait to see if there's any final questions, thank you all so much for joining me today. If you have any other further individualized questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If there's any specific challenges that you have faced during this time that you'd like to discuss, again, just reach out. We here at NESCA are more than excited to be able to help students during the transition time and help students and parents have as smooth and productive transition process as possible.
Great, and I don't believe we have any further questions, so I too would like to thank everyone for participating, and we will be following up with the presentation, and the webinar will be going on the NESCA website as well. And I think that is it for the Q&A. All right, thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.